Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Currently, US isn't divided into two wings, right? But three sides: leftist, rightist, and centrist. The urgency here is to make sure that Democrats will win because if it's not now, they will never win, and I will explain further in my speech. But before that, several rebuttals to OG. First, Kamala Harris knows the flaw of the law system, which means she can make it as a discourse once she's elected. And just because Kamala Harris is a prosecutor, it doesn't mean that we should stigmatize her against the black community. In fact, uh, Kamala Harris support from the black community is really massive, and um, the on just the line of women of color becoming the U.S. president already appeal massively, especially in current condition that see Black Lives Matter or BLM as massive movement and trendy. And there are two things that I will be discuss in my speech. First, why in the principle left wing is a left wing idea will be still catered in our side of the house, and second, even if it if, even if it's not, why it is okay to sacrifice it now. So first, um, if OG said that Joe Biden is a centrist candidate, that's why he needs a leftist candidate like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, we say that it's not really true because Joe Biden has shown us his leftist side. For example, he supports the widened scale of Obama's care. He protects the minority. He also wants to undo Trump's decision about borders. So in our status quo, and in our side, left wing isn't being left out now. So why we should have another left wing Democrats then? And I will explain to you why it is not matter on my second arguments. And yeah, because in order to win, Democrats cannot really rely only on leftists. We should also persuade people in gray area or centrists to vote for us. That's why Kamala Harris is the solution. We can see other VP candidates agenda. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, they all have one thing in common: leftist agenda. Like I said, we need diversity. The only way Democrats to fight Republicans is to bring diversity in them, not only about talking about Democrats' left-wing principles, but also other scope like Black Lives Matter, which is a hot topic right now. And this will attract people, fear out missing out people who will care because who will vote for Democrats because here's the thing: if you only have if you want left-wing VP candidates, you only gain vote from the leftists. But when you make Kamala Harris your VP, Joe Biden is already being the leftist, and Kamala Harris is being centrist. So you can attract both sides, and that left Republicans with the rightists. And I think that it is really justified to do so because what the main urgent now is to win against Republicans, right? And Democrats should use this as a momentum. Like I said in the beginning of my speech, if it's not now, then Democrats will never win. Because as we know, currently in US, the discrimination topic, Black Lives Matter topic is really hot. People all over the world are paying attention, and moreover, the US citizen itself, they want to participate in order to look quote unquote good in the eye of people because it shows them that they care about black people, right? And by making Kamala Harris the woman of color as your VP, it attracts this kind of people to vote you, although they don't care about the leftist side. But like I said, the urgency here is to make Democrats win, right? And if it's not now, it will never happen again because we will never know when this kind of thing will happen in the future. And why does it really matter for Democrats to win? Because we cannot deny that yes, Joe Biden wants to win against Trump, and it's not completely like that. It is also the Democrats. In US, if you don't win in presidential election, you will lose your chance for the whole period. In the end of the day, you will not be able to do your leftist wing agenda because you don't have the chance to do so. But if you gain vote from both leftists and centrist, you will definitely win because you gain vote from 2 out of 3 parts of US, frankly, and later you can do your agenda, right? Like you have nothing to lose here, but once you choose leftist Democrats as your VP, you will definitely lose the chance to take US citizens' heart. You will lose the chance to make America great again. And it's not what the Trump said, because you know that leftist principle is good, but it's not the only thing. You cannot force your ego to just take your own people and neglect the other important part, which is the centrist. And I think most of the youngsters now are most of them are centrist, and that's why we need to attract them because their votes matter, and we really need Kamala Harris in order to gain that, because Joe Biden alone cannot do that because he's not really centrist. He's more into left side now, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris just complete each other. That's why we are proud to oppose.
Thank you for the speech. Now to continue the cases from opening government, let's call the Deputy Prime Minister here.
Testing, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you. In my speech, I'm going to focus on answering that question about which vice president candidate is best placed to defeat Donald Trump, nicely clashing with what the opening opposition has brought to this debate. And I think that that candidate is not Kamala Harris, rather that candidate is Elizabeth Warren. Also, but before that, I'm going to create some rebuttals on the arguments that opening opposition have stated. So first is the notion here of how do we gain victory? What strategy should we focus here? One of the strategies talking about is this idea that Kamala Harris, as a prosecutor, shouldn't be dismissed because she knows the problems of the criminal justice system. But however, the problem is that Kamala Harris has known no other career other than prosecutor, which means she has had a very long career as a prosecutor. And her trademark approach has been a very tough on crime approach, in which the solution for more crimes, solution for more crimes is more police enforcement. It is legitimate for police enforcement to raise revenues for the state, and so on, and so on and so forth. The problem here is that when you have a long career saying that, even if you can make the argument that you have converted, that you have changed your ideas to these ideas, you are not going to be portrayed as sincere. Rather, you are going to be portrayed that, well, because BLM is very powerful, we want to appeal to them, therefore I changed my mind. That's the problem with people who already have a track record as a prosecutor in this regard. Secondly, as well, moreover, we are not starting in the right position already, because Joe Biden is a co-sponsor of the 1994 crime bill that popularized terms like super predators and prosecution for a difference in prosecution between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. This substantially harms the Black community. So already the campaign already starts in a handicap in which people do not really believe that there is very strong ability to reform the criminal justice system in general and reform the police. If you get a prosecutor to do that argument,
on that point,
yes, Rifan, yes, please.
The problem is the major policy platform made by Sanders was also not defunding the police, but rather improving police welfare in order to make better quality of police, which indicate there is no agreeable stance between progressive themselves talking about how we should treat social justice system in United States.
I agree. I agree. There is that certain kind of debate, of course. But what we want is an individuals who are first can be shown as sympathetic to many point of view as well, and second doesn't have a preconceived notion of what the right approach is, which is Elizabeth Warren, because Elizabeth Warren can be seen as a rookie on this issue, but also there is also a rookie that is very known as a policy wonk, as an individual that focus on what is the maths, what is the right policy, what is the outcomes, how do we analyze them. So in this regard, the fact that both in the left, in the far left, and in the Democratic Party, there is no disagreement. Actually, it points out very well the idea of Elizabeth Warren that after I study, after I have these ideas, actually this is the best approach, and that is the approach that can be shown as fresh to our citizens rather than Kamala Harris. Secondly, as well, on the notion here that we should appeal not just to the center, not just to the left, but the center. This is already weird, right? Because why? Because Joe Biden already is a centrist guy, right? So why would you add more centrist guy in this regard, right? This rather we should complement that by having someone who is more leftist. Moreover, actually, Elizabeth Warren, while also losing in the primary, while also not performing very well in the primary, might conceivably have cross-party appeal among the Republicans. Why do I say that? Because the Republicans right now have Trump supporters, the populist right, who might not be happy about Donald Trump, but are very afraid of the left, and those who are never Trumpers. The never Trumpers are very small. The Trump supporters are very hardcore supporters of them, but a lot of the populist right can be attracted by left-wing populism because the idea of protectionism, stronger welfare state, reining in the power of the big business is very important to these individuals. And I think this is actually where Elizabeth Warren is also very strong, because also reining in Wall Street and reining in big businesses is one of her major life work, members of the House. Therefore, we are show here that Kamala Harris, who is actually accepts a lot of large-scale donations from politicians who are also very, very strong individuals on that regard, on supporting these corporates, are not likely to be able to approach this populist right. And the good thing about Elizabeth Warren as well is she is not as extreme as Bernie Sanders, who wants socialism. She's an avowed capitalist still. So she is very powerful as well to be able to have some cross-party approach that is actually very good, especially now that the Democratic support among their base is also tanking as well, members of the House. So moving on. We are moving on here on the idea of the role of the VP in beating Donald Trump. The problem here is that Joe Biden has a long career, but not much in the way of congressional initiative in policy making. A lot of the time, he's very much a backbencher, and in his reign as vice president was also not very policy making specific. Kamala Harris have no experience as policymaker as well, which is a problem, because then you have a problem in policy making. Take it. And when you're facing Donald Trump, that means that you are losing a huge ability to make a contrast. These are the adults in the room that you can be trusted to make policies, members of the House. While Joe Biden does not have that record, Kamala Harris doesn't have that record, it becomes very difficult for us to have that contrast. And that contrast is absolutely necessary these days because of the situation of Donald Trump showing that he's simply just not competent to rule America, members of America. Therefore, a candidate like Elizabeth Warren with very long experience in policy making in Congress and knowing how that get things done actually much more better. Secondly, as well, in order here is that Kamala Harris' appeal is targeted toward Black community. Yet her record in Black community wasn't very good. She wasn't very appealing there. Moreover, this overlaps with Joe Biden, who already have very strong appeal to the Black community. So so it is very difficult for us to get additional support from the Black community from a community that already supports Joe Biden, and therefore Kamala Harris does not have an additional power to that ticket. Thirdly, as well, Kamala Harris' position also makes enthusiasm for left-wing Democratic strategy in the far left much lower, which is also harmful for left-wing Democrats. Because when Kamala Harris was elected, this shown there is no concession to the policies that have been brought by Bernie Sanders and ideas, no concession to optics of the far left. That means that the far left is going to move back again to social movements and even insurrection strategy, Antifa and so on, which breaks the power of the far left, because the unity that we tried in order to build democratic, influence the democratic policy is now abandoned again. So this rolls back as well the approach of the left-wing political parties, and therefore this is very regrettable that we have to get Kamala Harris as VP. Thank you very much.
Speech now to close the cases from the opening bench. Opening half, let's call the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Check. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, I will quit timer. Right. I will start in 3, 2, 1. Current momentum of Black Lives campaign, NBA boycotting because of Jacob Black shooting or George Floyd death, for example, and those massive support upon the existence of demonstration coming from Black Lives community is something that is recalled as a momentum in the status quo for us to gaining more voters, especially coming from the swing state. We don't understand why opening government cases is basically talk about Kamala Harris is not leftist, and so on and so forth. Because we think that the current campaign, current run in the presidential election is not about Joe Biden will eventually always win, but rather it's about who can win in the swing state. Because we need to understand that the current condition is that the Republican will always be Republican and they are united in the status quo. They will vote for Trump no matter what, because they are not someone that is very idealistic, that Trump must bring a certain value of Republican, for example, hence we will not vote him if they are not actually supporting us, so on and so forth. But this is the problem that we see in Democrats. Upon the leftist agenda, the leftist people always talk about centrist is inherently bad, for example. If the candidate is actually centrist, so on and so forth, we will not vote for them. But we think that the context is that is not the context that we should talk about. Why? Because if opening government want to claim that we need a leftist people to eventually check and balance Joe Biden, for example, we don't think that it is necessary on a very basic case. Why? Because not that Joe Biden in the status quo already brings some leftist agenda. What does it look like? It looks like Joe Biden is actually supporting the widened scale of Obamacare, for example, revocation of student debt and abolishing, also recovery on immigrant, for example, and those kind of things. We think that Joe Biden and how this Democrat eventually have the discourse in the status quo upon Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talk with Kamala Harris, for example, Elizabeth Warren with Kamala Harris as a fellow woman, for example, who have these kind of discourses about what kind of idea that should be brought by Joe Biden, we think that it's enough of bringing a leftist agenda. But why we think choosing Elizabeth Warren over Kamala Harris is something that is significantly will be bad for Democrats. Because we think that the debate should be on the basis, will the Democrat eventually get this kind of US presidential election? Because we think that is important to have, because no matter if you actually want to bring your very ideal agenda, if you are not being chosen, it is useless anyway. I will prove it later, right? Several rebuttals. Firstly, about when the opening government want to claim about there is this kind of Trumpers, for example, that is attracted to a popular leftist populist, right? We question how significant it is, because if it's actually significant, not that Warren, those kind of Democrat who is very leftist, will win the primary anyway to those kind of mass support. But the fact that this kind of person is not actually, no thank you, win this kind of primary election shows that this kind of agenda is not very populist in nature, right? The unique politics in US is that their party will eventually support anyone who's chosen in the primary. This is why we see Buttigieg and Warren endorse Biden at the end of the day. But we think that it is not stopped only by supporting Biden, but also putting up discourses about what kind of leftist policy that we think that's still being upholded anyway. Right? Secondly, it's about when they claim about Joe and Kamala Harris actually being tough on crime, right? What I do not understand is that why Warren, that has a reputation as a rookie, will be seen as credible on talking about this kind of cases. Not that Warren never have this kind of stances upon what kind of approaches that we should have to this kind of solvency of Black Lives community, for example, solvency about crime in police office, for example, so on and so forth. We don't understand about this kind of thing. But why choosing Kamala Harris will eventually get us more voters, right? Because we think that the race is very close in the status quo, and the only way for us to win is to have the swing voters. Let's characterize this kind of swing voter that we have in the status quo, right? We think that the swing voter that we have is those who have a stance of fear of missing out, for example, that currently see Black Lives Matter as a popular agenda, for example. That's why we see a rapid support coming from this kind of person to Black Lives Matter community, right? This Black Lives Matter case is a bit bipartisan. We agree upon this. And the only way to you to attract this kind of thing is to show a real move. What candidate did you choose to represent this kind of Black community? We think that the only way for you to do that is choosing a woman of color, a people that coming from people of color, for example. This is why we think Kamala Harris can eventually make us have a massive supporter, because the supporter is not only those who are swing voters, but also, no thank you, those who also are fans of black public figure, for example. What does it look like? Supporter of Kamala Harris is also included Chapman, rest in peace, that also have a massive supporter as well in his fans, for example, so on and so forth. We see a massive support from people of color community to Kamala Harris. We think that this is a momentum for us to gain far more better supporter, because we think that opening government need to also play in the worst case scenario. Why, even if we are not eventually win this kind of election, it is okay. That I will explain further. But before that, one last thing to rebut from opening government is that Elizabeth Warren is brave enough to go against this kind of Wall Street, basically anti-capitalist agenda, right? We think that this kind of agenda is something that will not make us win and eventually just break the image coming from Joe Biden, right? Because the Joe Biden image in the status quo is massively about Trump is bad, for example. Trump is inherently bad, so you need to choose Democrat, right? But we think that when you use this kind of full anti-capitalism agenda, most of the time the swing voters that is pragmatic in nature will eventually see this as something that is too radical, something that you cannot opt into, because no thank you, we still need a lot of this kind of capitalistic company, because we still need them to eventually give us tax, for example. We cannot live without them, for example, so on and so forth. This is why a lot of people cannot engage to the idea coming from Bernie Sanders, for example, or Elizabeth Warren, simply because it is too radical in nature, right? So what is the idea extension that coming from opposition? We think that the urgency for us to win this kind of US presidential election is very rapid. Why is that the case? Not that this kind of presidential election is also a momentum, who wins it will eventually win another election in the short term, like House of Reps, for example, or Senate election. As long as the midway there is no fucked up cases like Trump called with Ukraine, for example, so on and so forth. This is why we think that November election is pretty much important for further election. What does it mean? And why does this case is actually important? Because not that U.S. president power is that massive. Veto upon this kind of legislative power, for example, or even president power in Supreme Court, for example, that clearly we see that Trump using it for advancing his agenda, for example, to make Republican far more controlling the Supreme Court, for example, so on and so forth. This kind of power that president has, there's also the momentum that is who wins it, because note that most of the time House of Legislative and Senate election is also figure based on what presidents actually win. Usually the party will win in this kind of election is also something that is important to have, because without this kind of power inside of this kind of House of Legislative or Senate, for example, we cannot advance any leftist agenda whatsoever. What we say is that not leftist agenda is bad, but rather we think that the momentum that we should have is to abide first the populist agenda that exists in the society before the leftist agenda can be brought. What we prove to you in opening opposition is that leftist agenda is still being brought anyway, and we think that secondly, to you for winning election and having a betterment in the future for leftist Democrat, we think that what is important to have a massive supporter first, we brought to oppose.
Thank you for the speech. Now to open the closing half of this debate, let's welcome the member of government here.
Check, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Opening really creates a huge assumption that is the interest of the left-wing Democrats are to win the election. Is it though? Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that as the left-wing Democrats, we have been too long become the illegitimate child of the Democratic Party. We are oftentimes sidelined. We are oftentimes told that we are not good enough to ever win the election. We are told that we could never become the president, be it even vice president, because we are not compromising enough. We are too radical. We are not suitable for the American values. This is what we want to change. That is why, regardless of winning or not, we don't think that that is what truly matters. What truly matters is for us to gain back power, to be able to become a truly interest group inside of the Democratic Party system, because that is what essentially what we are. We are an interest group. This is why we argue that even if Biden eventually wins with Kamala Harris, we think that it's still bad for us as an interest group, because it doesn't really reflect what we truly want, right? We are different with opening government and especially opening opposition, right? Because opening government basically tell you about what kind of policy are you going, do you want, what kind of person is Biden and Kamala Harris, and then shortlist all of the harms that they have done in the past. But we're going to be different, ladies and gentlemen, because we're not going to be contingent on do we win or not, or what kind of policy are we going to make. No. What we are going to do is to ensure the Democratic Party becomes a party that could be sustainable for our future run as the leftist Democrats. I would like to talk about several things. First of all, I'm going to explain the context about who we truly are and what is our main interest. Second, I'm going to talk about several scenarios. First, I'm going to talk about the scenario of election, what will happen there. Second, I'm going to talk about the best case where we have Warren as the VP. And lastly, I'm going to talk about Biden winning with Kamala Harris. Why is that still bad? So several contexts here. I'm sure all of you know that right now, the leftists in the Democratic Party system do not really have any power. True, we have some senators like Ilhan Omar or like AOC, for example, but those are not strategic position. The strategic position, like the Speaker of the House, is held by a centrist like Nancy Pelosi. What does it mean? It means the one who can create what kind of policy that do they want, what kind of policy will be taught in the House and in the Congress, are going to be judged and determined by these people, by the centrists. This is why in 2016, Hillary Clinton wins, even if she lost majority of the primary season, because the leaders of the party still favor a centrist politician instead of a leftist politician. This is very bad, right? This is what we want to change, right, in our side of the house. How? First of all, in the election scenario. Okay, first of all, I think what we have to argue here, the chances for Republican Party is already very bad with Trump, basically turning everything into chaos, like how there are states that is conservative and opening up the economy soon, and they soon come back to quarantine because of the rise in the coronavirus. We've seen failure in international relations with Iran's nuclear deal are not still in the closing right now, with North Korea now starting to become more hostile towards us. Basically, Trump is fucked up right now, right? This is why I think that it's not very important about who's going to become our vice president later on. But I'm going to argue to you that we think that we're still going to be able to win with Warren. Why is that so? Because the biggest critics to Trump's administration is because he do not have any plan at all. For example, people criticizing him, saying that you do not have any plan and so on and so forth. This is where Warren comes in, right? Because Warren is going to be seen as a person that has a lot of plan. So arguably, what I'm going to say here is not that Warren is significantly better than Harris. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is Harris and Warren is in an equal ground in terms of trying to attract voters. This is why what matters is changing the internal political system of the Democratic Party instead of reeling in voters. This is the stance of closing government, and we are very different with opening government, okay? So I think that in the election system, we're going to give out messages, we're going to have charismatic leaders like AOC, Ilhan Omar, talking about leftist agenda that will impact the people, right? The people that used to think that, okay, maybe leftist agenda is quite good, but now they're going to think that leftist agenda can win, ladies and gentlemen, because the Democratic Party has given them trust to actually run as politicians. This is something that is unprecedented, right? We know that currently the U.S. political environment has started to shifting to the left, but it's not enough because people still don't believe left people can win. And this is why what we're going to change to the people, changing all this perception. Now, let's talk about the scenario where Warren win as a VP, right? So, what kind of power does a VP have? I think it's not a simple name as vice president and being written in the historical book. No, it is one, positioning strategic people inside of the system. What does it mean? It means political leaders that is very leftist, that is once denied to have power, can now get power. That means we're going to start to see people that is very leftist, for example, AOC or Ilhan Omar, to be a strategic leaders, right? For example, in the Congress and in the houses, for example, they're going to be speaker of the house. They're going to determine what kind of policy are you going to create. This power is not available in the status quo, and this is what is going to change, because VP do have that power, right? Secondly, VP becomes a role model. VP becomes someone that people look up to. This is why this will create a very strong messages to new politicians, right? People that says that that was once very alienated, they're going to start seeing this and they're going to be incentivized to join the system. They're not going to be a niche party that is going to be left out in the end of the day, but now they're going to see Democratic Party as a house for the leftist agenda, for example. This is very good, right? Because we're going to reel more people, more activists inside of our system. Lastly, what if Biden wins with Kamala Harris? First thing, whose win is this? Is this really the leftist win? We don't think so, right? Because the reason why people elect Biden and Kamala Harris is exactly because they are not leftists. They are centrists. This is why we think that we are not going to really have anything about this, right? That this is harmful and this is too radical. But lastly, I think this can actually harm the leftist agenda. Why? Because that means it validates that the winning recipe for Democratic Party is to always play safe, is to always be centrist, right? And this is what we don't want to have as the leftist Democrat. To stop become the illegitimate child, we are proud to propose this debate.
Thank you for the speech. Now to open the cases from the closing oppositions, I would like to welcome the member of opposition here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, for those who want to request for POI, just immediately interrupt through voice rather than through chat. That will be more convenient for me. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. There are going to be 3 unique contributions done by closing opposition. CO is the only team that will prove whether or not having anti-capitalist figure is strategic for left and also Democrat winning the election. Secondly, we are going to uniquely explain the technocratic ability of Kamala Harris as justice system expert more than just name and also status as ex-district attorney, as what the opening opposition did. And thirdly, we are going to be the one who explain what should be the long-term focus of the left in US politics and whether or not left policy is well accommodated under Biden candidacy, so we can, to some extent, trade off and sacrifice our absence of progressive political candidate inside vice presidents. Moving on to first contribution. The primary critics made by government bench, both opening and closing, says that the weakness of Kamala Harris is that she is not vocal enough to tax the rich. She is not vocal enough to dismantle capitalism, while at the same time Elizabeth Warren possesses that trait. Member of the House, we don't think that this popular statement and popular jargon of anti-rich can be easily taken for granted as a success and also big formal recipe of victory for Democrat and the left to win the election. Why? Because apparently historically it has been proven clearly that Sanders lose miserably here using the same strategy over and over again. Why? Because sentiment against the rich apparently are not aspirational to ground voter. The left focused too much on political figure rather than rebuilding non-governmental institution that functions well at the absence of governmental body. And this strategy makes Sanders losing very much during the primary against Biden, even though at that time they are win in terms of crowdfunding. They are far more popular when Sanders is the most popular candidate in comparisons of Biden, who is as popular as dental insurance in Google search. But that is the truth. Why does that happen? Because The failure of us of just saying anti-rich rather than building a traditional body inside the organization successfully makes working class in Michigan, who's predominantly voted for Sanders, overwhelmingly move to Biden. And Sanders' victory in California, for example, is predominantly caused by middle to rich class instead of poor Californian. Having Warren to speak louder about eating the rich doesn't help. Therefore, the focus of the left should step back and re-strategize, rather than just crying out loud for having Kamala Harris instead of Elizabeth Warren. Not to mention that we do not think Elizabeth Warren will be a better candidate in increasing voter turnout due to bad blood relation between Warren and also Sanders supporters. Warren is seen as clustered as a progressive traitor for her refusal of endorsing endorsing Sanders and also backing out before Super Tuesday, potentially creating a progressive vote split between Sanders and also Warren. And this bad blood relationship means that it doesn't automatically mean that Sanders supporter will vote to Democrat just because Warren is at hand. And this is an indication that having Warren is not a surefire guarantee of victory here. Moving on to the second questions of technocratic ability. Any POI? No, okay. Yes.
But in comparison, of course, the hatred of the left wing of the Democratic Party towards Kamala Harris is much higher than their hatred
Yes,
towards
yes.
Elizabeth Warren.
I agree to that. And I would like to boldly say that apparently having left and far left to support Democrat is not necessarily primary strategy to appease right now, because they are not necessarily a strategic voting bloc for Democrat. So this is a decision that should be still welcome. And I will explain further in my third contribution. Moving on to the second technocratic ability. So the arguments made by opening government says that Kamala Harris is not necessarily good to create justice reform because Kamala Harris has been proving a track record of tough on crime. The proof is saying that she criminalizes marijuana. But similar to legalizing prostitution, legalizing marijuana is not a slam dunk case that is always superior rather than criminalizing marijuana. Several states, such as California, who do experimentations of legalizing marijuana, suffering the same problem of uncontrolled distribution of marijuana and overusage of marijuana, which indicates that this is not a true indication of bad district attorney performance. In return, we do think that there are so many technocratic ability that is exclusive within district attorney. There are many justice reform that require technical expertise as district attorney. For example, applications of body cam, the way of the escalation method when violence happens, which sectors can be reallocated to social services instead of police department? How are we going to decentralize control of Justice Department as primary policy platform done by Joe Biden? All of those things are central and require technocratic ability because this is not a question of justice. This is a question of technocratic implementation, and therefore technocratic implementation require expertise that only Kamala Harris is good at in comparison of Warren. Moving on to the last questions. Whether or not left and progressive will be accommodated even though there is no figure that represent them. The answer is yes. Apparently right now, there has been Biden-Sanders task force that creates policy platform for Biden, where major progressive policies have been included, including massive investment in green energy that equates to $2 trillion US, where the number is far greater and more ambitious than Green New Deal made by Sanders and AOC. Student debt abolition, public option in Medicare, despite not as radical as universal healthcare, is still an incremental progress that we should cherish. But more importantly, left should focus on local victory rather than just regretting the candidacy of Kamala Harris. We have good momentum to have more candidates rather than AOC or Ilhan Omar, Beth Duglio, David Zuckerman, Pramila Jayapal, and these candidates require support. And therefore, local election should be our priority rather than just crying out loud and regretting the vice president candidacy. We oppose.
Thank you for the speech. Now to close the cases from government bench, I'll call the government whip here.
Oh, I'm audible.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. I'm gonna start in 3, 2. I think that we're the only team that tell you why suddenly a vice president is necessarily important, not just to the large Democratic Party, but specifically to the leftists. This is something that none of the bench actually answers. Well, we tell you in our side of the house that it's not just making policy, but to the future of leftists currently being in the progress is dependent on whether or not we are in a place of power. Sure, Rifan can tell you currently there are small wins, but number one, that is completely not exclusive. But secondly, we don't necessarily think that you will, in the end of the day, will have that kind of ability if what you're going to win is just small wins, right? We think the moment that you actually have you actually have a leftist vice president, that's the moment where we gain power, where people like the AOC, like the team of the Green New Deal that Sanders and AOC make, like how Rifan told you, can work. Then is the moment we take this power, right? And this also answer about that this debate is not just about winning, but it's about the value that the current leftists have, and exactly we answer that to our agenda, because our agenda is not just like winning now, because now Trump is already that bad. People do not like Trump right now anyway, right? That's why we think that in the end we're the only team that answers these questions. But firstly, let's differentiate ourselves with OG, right? What OG tell you was to say that currently we're going to have stronger in terms of voting, and we have the same ideology. But they never proved to you how then, when we are in power, we are able to push our agenda. Then, what is necessarily our interest, and why can't we do that in other time, for instance, or in like small wins, as how closing opposition tell you? What we tell you in our side of the house, that it's possible then to push the certain agenda because we changed the internal structure of our current party. This is exactly why we also tell you that even if Kamal win, exactly we are not going to achieve the goal that we want. So we answer the burden coming from our opening government, right? With that said, I think there are two things to talk about to talk in here. First, I think there's an issue about voting about voters and the voter turnout. Secondly, on the issue on whether we want Kamala Harris to be in power and whether that is good for us as a leftist. First, let's talk about the voter. Let's start with opening opposition. Because opening oppositions tell you that currently swing voter is FOMO, right? They're afraid that they missed out the current trends. Here's the thing, right? They try to characterize this into a very small number of group of people that these swing voter doesn't really think. The reason why they are swing voter, ladies and gentlemen, is because they see people pragmatically. What does this mean? This means when my member tell you that they are already in the same ground, the question is, what will this pragmatic actor will still see it that way? We think that exactly because it's most likely that these people are far more pragmatic. We think that's perfectly fine. But the problem with this was their characterization saying that, Republican will always be Republican and currently they're just going to vote for Trump. We think that this is necessarily untrue. We think that currently even there are Republicans who are opposing Trump, who are currently siding with the Democrat in the end of the day. So we don't think that necessarily swing voter is such a problem in this debate, because we think in both sides we'll still have that anyway, right? Secondly, let's talk about closing opposition and tell you that currently currently Warren is going to split the votes between the progressive. Ladies and gentlemen,
we're already split the moment Biden have become president. But you know what the narrative that exists? The narrative that currently exists is to say that, do you want Trump to win or do you want Democrat to win? What does it mean? It means that even the current narrative, whoever the candidate is, because of that strong narrative of not wanting Trump to win anyway, we think that split is not necessarily that it doesn't necessarily matter in this context. What matters in this context is how then we achieve the goal, how then we achieve the interests that we currently have. So what does this prove to you? This proves to you that voter turnout is not necessarily a problem in this case, because of all the narrative and all the hate that we have towards the current incumbent government. There is a probability that we'll lose, but there are also a high chances that we'll win, and we don't think that this is what the debate should be about. But secondly, right, whether or not we want Kamala Harris to be in power, what did closing oppositions tell you? Closing opposition tell you that currently there are going to be AOC, for instance, or there are going to be Sanders that currently already progressive. We have this like local small wins. But the problem with local small wins is that you cannot create the changes that is necessarily important, ladies and gentlemen. We think that these are problems such as housing that necessarily need the power inside of presidency, for instance. We necessarily think that using defunding the police, for instance, is not going to happen on their side of the house, because these are the kind of policy that we think matter to our voter, because their side of the house is only fulfilling the interests of the whole Democratic Party, but not necessarily the leftist community, right? Because sure, even if let's say that it's enough to have these local wins on their side of the house, would then the changes that they say they're going to wait for that is enough? Because we think that for far too long, we already have been in sidelines. What does it mean? It means that our voter, our people currently have been suffering from many, many losses. So we think that's perfectly fine for us to be a lot more aggressive and to achieve our goal by any means necessary. This means that even if there are these current changes, it's most likely one, it's not going to be sustainable in the future. They have to prove to you why then they can sustain with the imbalanced power structure that currently exists inside of the Democratic Party. We think it's going to be very hard for you the moment that imbalance will still be there. But most likely, notice how even if Biden is trying to change, most likely it's going to be just performative, ladies and gentlemen. We think exactly how we strengthen the Democratic Party itself and create and mend the split that they say is going to happen exactly when we have this kind of these kind of leftist vice presidents. For all those reasons, we're very proud to propose.
Thank you for the speech. Now to close the debate, let's call the opposition whip. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, hold on. All right. I'm starting in 1, 2, 3. The burden of opposition bench in this debate is to prove why the appointment of Kamala is not regrettable, and as leftists, we are not going to criticize the action. Our burden in this debate is not to say why Kamala is the most ideal candidate for leftists, because if that's the debate, maybe as leftists, we will also regret the win of Biden as we prefer Bernie Sanders. So the stance from closing opposition is clear. We think that the defeat of leftist candidates such as Warren and Sanders are fair, and Kamala Harris, in the contrary, is a worthy candidate as we still have our ideas being represented in the government. So we think it's fine, and we do not want to be a snowflakes that acts like a crybaby, as we are going to affirm the stereotype of noisy leftists that only want what they want to be achieved in the end, right? So we think that it's better for us to involve ourselves in the candidacy and having much more feedback for the existing candidates that we have, instead of just baselessly criticizing the policy based on past precedent. Meanwhile, that Kamala, as what Rifan has already told you, that already showing a direction of progress that we also want as leftist community, right? So that's the point of clarification that we need in this debate. Now, going to the first issue, right? I'm going to talk about who is the better candidate to approach swing voters and also gray area base, because it seems like the opening government and also closing government is actually thinking that Warren is a better candidate to attract much more voter to it. Now, I'm going to talk to you about how Republican and swing voters in the US are the voters that operate under the principle of lesser evil, surprisingly. That having Trump and staying in the status quo is much better than having leftists that set off the narrative of killing the rich, taxing the rich over and over again. That's the reason why evangelists still support Trump, even when the history of having extramarital affair. This proves to you that the majority of swing voters are comfortable with conformity, and the idea of having big brother government that leftist perception is creating is actually very scary for them. So they will less likely to choose Warren because the general public do not support extra mild structural changes like having universal healthcare, but rather they are the one that want to repair the existing program, such as Obamacare, exactly what Kamala Harris and Joe Biden is actually campaigning about in the status quo. So we think that in the comparison, in the ability for how they'll be able to attract the swing voters, it is much, much better for us in order to support Kamala Harris, right? And I think that the threat that we are facing right now is very real, that as leftists, we can no longer tolerate another presidency with Trump as our leader. And that's the reason why Rifan's argument is actually the most important thing in this debate, because we'd rather to support Kamala and galvanizing our support against Trump. Why? Because leftist candidates, based on past precedents, tend to do worse because they are failing to galvanize their own base, which is in this case is the internal support from the Democratic Party. Why? Because they are too busy criticizing and creating internal fraction within their own Democratic Party. Case in point is Hillary Clinton in the past presidential race, right? And instead, what they are doing with we are endorsing Elizabeth Warren, this is going to encourage more opponent supporter, which in this case is right wing, to turn out more, to even galvanize much more hatred against our party, right? Because Trump supporter will react more against Warren instead of Kamala Harris. And we think that at this current momentum, we need to be strategic and endorsing Kamala Harris simply because for the reason that this is going to create a bigger chances of winning in comparison to Warren that want to create free college tuition for everyone. And we think that on this idea, this is much better because when we have Kamala as our candidate, the reaction from Republicans is going to be less reactionary and less aggressive in comparison to Warren. And based on that strategy alone, this is going to be very beneficial for our party, right? But also, I'm going to talk about the second issue, which is how it's better for us to focus on the small wins. Rifan has already told you, right, about how currently we have a lot of other individuals that actually is progressive and going to represent our ideas. Now I'm going to talk about how, as internal Democrats that are leftists, we cannot rely too much on the vice president position, and it is very much possible for you to have your agendas being championed even on the state and even on the regional level. Why? Simply because relying on the cult of personality of, for example, Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren is not going to be better for you as a leftist candidate because you are going to only rely on a one-man leadership, right? We think this is much better if you're going to distribute the power to another candidate. First, it's better because now you can be focused supporting smaller agenda and fighting on the smaller battle that is more realistic to win, because there are states that are pro-leftist, for example, and you can create wins first in that area. So we think that it is much more attainable and we can create a win step by step in comparison to aiming to win on the federal level that is unrealistic, unattainable due to the high influence from Trump in the status quo. So we think that having gradual and grassroots changes in the small wins is actually much more attainable and preferable. But also we think that having small wins is an integral part of having much bigger wins in the future for you to be able to capture much bigger audiences, right? So we think that on closing opposition, this is the contribution that is unique and exclusive because we told you about how grassroots movement with leftists supporting Kamala Harris and also supporting another politicians in our community is going to be much better given that we are going to have a gradual and grassroots changes. But also with regretting this is going to send off the narrative of leftists becoming a snowflakes in which we are criticizing everything that includes vice president position, right? We think that it's much better for us to become a bigger person, to be fair, and in the end, we accept the decision and have our ideas being represented in the idea of in comparison to the idea of having Trump and Republicans as our leader. We are very proud to oppose this debate.
Thank you. So yeah, go back.
All right, thank you for the speech, everyone, for this talk. So I think everyone can leave this breakout room and go back to the meeting hall so the educator can deliberate. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the debate, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.